Enlightenment's history begins during the spirit of the Rococo. Although perhaps not the most iconic, the most lastingly true and beautiful paintings of the 18th century Rococo style were Watteau's Fête Galante. The Fête Galante was not only a decorative theme in many paintings of the time of Watteau, but a real activity of which the aristocratic class of France took part. The theme of the Fête Galante celebrated the conventional manner in which courtly men and women engaged in polite, amorous conversation outdoors. At the time, viewers would have considered Watteau's depiction of the Fête Galante as illustrations of customary affairs of high-class Parisians. To Watteau, these scenes hailed courtly gallantry as the transfiguration of love into light itself. Indeed, the free space and time enjoyed by the wealthy and aristocratic people of France had begun a new trend not only of love as light across the continent, but the shimmering new light of ideas. The light in Watteau's painting, as well as the light of the Rococo in general, reflected the budding spirit of the century of New Thought, the Enlightenment. Philosophers in the salons of Paris and the coffeehouses of Britain had begun the process of confronting old religious ideas, desiring to separate the true, concrete ideas from the traditional propositions of metaphysics. Wisdom that Europeans thought to be true since the Middle Ages in the time of Watteau began showing cracks that would eventually lead to a total collapse of the previous systems of thought. David Hume's revolutionary skeptical treatises cast doubt on a priori knowledge, or beliefs given to us by God. A century before, René Descartes had sown the seeds of the new movement in philosophy by forefronting man's responsibility to rely only on the human mind to obtain truth and knowledge. Among Europe's elite, secularism had taken root, but how long would it take before the lower classes that could not afford the luxury of the salon, coffeehouses, or fête galante heard the news? How long before these ideas would change the world? Watteau died in 1721, at the early age of 36, or 37. We don't know the specific date, as historical records on the notoriously elusive painter are scarce. "20 years later, when the infant Enlightenment movement had grown in scale and identity, another painter was born, this time in Spain. Francisco Goya grew up in Fuendetodos, a small town near the city of Zaragoza. The windswept desert mountains around the city would make their way later into the dreamlike barren hills of the backdrops to many of his paintings. Goya began his professional career as an artist working for one of the artistic institutions that the ideas of the Enlightenment would eventually uproot. The Spanish artist worked for the traditional craft founded in the Middle Ages of creating tapestry wall hangings displayed in Spain's royal estates and manors. The paintings that he created as templates for the royal tapestry industry to weave are great masterpieces. The tapestries themselves are not. Goya could perhaps foresee that the manufacture of tapestries as fine artistic decoration, among other archaic practices, was going out of style among the elite of Spain. To go further, one may say that Goya was an artist prescient in his approach to making art in a world that no longer valued religious scenes or aristocratic customs. Some of the most well-known works by Goya today were not appreciated in their time, such as his series of prints, the Capriccios, which were purchased by very few, or the 3rd of May, which was seen by none at all. His work anticipated a time when art would be judged by broad populations, rather than a small group of wealthy elite with aristocratic tastes. The tapestry paintings have an air of darkness, a nightmarish quality. Although they were painted depicting lower-class Spanish citizens to amuse their wealthy patrons, there is something disturbing that makes its way into the painting. Perhaps, in a way, Goya could not help but mock the aristocratic class of which he always felt himself an outsider. But Goya's observant nature did not refrain from casting a critical eye over the peasant folk of Spain. In the Capriccios, he calls attention to the follies of both the high and low-class people of his home country, and showed that in the midst of the Great Enlightenment, Spain, at its core, still held a strong belief in the darkly supernatural. Goya published the Capriccios in 1797. In France, in the decade prior, the national debt had led to crippling taxation of the peasantry and bourgeoisie, and massive inflation of the French currency. People everywhere were starving, and soon the pressure reached its climax. With the coming of the French Revolution in 1789, the political and cultural landscape of Europe changed dramatically. The new tenets of reason were synonymous with the shift to a democratic view of human agency. The rules that were to govern society once the kings and dictators of old were eventually deposed found their origin in human will, observation, and accord, rather than in the holy books and tablets of an almighty and unseen God. When the National Assembly took power away from the king in France, French citizens began the harrowing process of proving to themselves and the rest of Europe that a secularized state could function just as well, if not better, than a feudal monarchy. Later, when revolutionary France began winning military victories against coalition upon coalition of the entirety of Europe at once, it was clear that the new revolutionary spirit had not only proven itself on the world stage, but shown the new enlightened ideals of reason to be a model that the rest of the world must heed, or else submit to French overlordship. The key point of the revolution in France was that it was not only a political overhaul, but a development fueled by a cultural phenomenon. The people of France now controlled the nation, rather than the clergy, nobility, or king. The entirety of the French populace could now fight in the wars for France's sovereignty, rather than a few thousand noblemen like the Austrians, Prussians, and British. Napoleon said he spent 30,000 men in a month, while the Austrians had 150,000 men fighting in total. The revolution was a movement by the people of France, Therefore, it held power only inasmuch as it was fervently supported by the people. Reason, therefore, can be said, too, to succeed only as much as it held popular support. Indeed, the main tenet of the French Revolution was not reason, as it was understood by the Enlightenment theoreticians of the 18th century, as much as it was the people's accession to its leadership. At the end of the 18th century, political rule, as far as it was replaced by reason, was determined by popular demand. But how did France's shift in power structure towards wider popular control affect art? The Church and the state, which had sponsored the arts for millennia as a means to ensure their support, had ceased to hold sway over the government. Beginning in the 19th century in France, as a rule, the clergy, nobility, and king no longer sponsored the arts as a means of upholding their political importance to the degree that they had previously. Therefore, artists had to look to the new model of popular demand to sell their paintings on the market. In France, the painter David created propagandistic masterworks in service to the revolution, and then later, as the power structure shifted again, to France's new dictator, Napoleon.